Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. So we are going to get started in just 1 minute. Again, this is reducing costs with quick water wins. So before we get started, I'm going to run through a couple of housekeeping items, and apologies for my voice. I am a little sick today. So there will be a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. You can submit questions for the Q&A session via the chat box to the host. To access the chat box, hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen and click on the bubble icon. A link to a recording of the session along with the presentation slides will be sent to all registrants after today's webinar. So that's it for me. I'll pass things over to Tara to start today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to be doing, we went through a couple of housekeeping items already. Today we're going to be talking about reducing costs with quick water wins. I'm Tara O'Hare. I've worked on the WaterSense program at EPA for 14 years now, and I've been working mostly on our helpline, managing our annual reporting process, as well as our outreach to commercial and institutional facilities. So we're really excited to have you on board today, and hopefully you learn some things along the way. So this is the first of the 2024 or 23, excuse me, Water Wednesdays that we're doing. We have a couple that we'll be doing in the next few months. We haven't completely scheduled them yet, but I have the topics that are here on the screen so that you guys can check them out, and you can register at the Energy Star website just like you did for this webinar. So first I want to start with some context because many of you are probably coming from the energy world, and we wanted to let you know that there's a pretty big nexus between energy and water that you may not think about. Every gallon of water has an energy footprint that's used to move, pump, heat, and treat water, and that's both within a building and within the water distribution system as well. Because of this embedded energy, you actually save quite a bit of energy while you're saving water, and vice versa. So 8% of commercial buildings' energy use actually goes to heating water, which is about the same percentage that is used for heating and cooling. So it's a pretty significant amount of energy use, and it's pretty important to pay attention to. Because of this, anything that uses hot water or steam will have significant energy and water savings. Because they are so connected, it's important to evaluate both water and energy efficiency when you're doing a project to really get the best results. Otherwise, you're leaving money on the table. So WaterSense can help you navigate this world. The WaterSense program, for those of you that don't know, is a voluntary program that was launched in 2006, and we really aim to provide simple ways for both businesses and consumers to find water efficient products, programs, practices, and homes. The WaterSense label is the one that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. It can be found on products that are independently certified to save 20% of their water and perform just as well as their standard counterparts. Back in the early 90s, when water efficient products first came out, they didn't work very well. So each one of the WaterSense specifications has a performance test that the product has to pass in order to be labeled. So for example, with a good shower, we had to define what a good shower would be. So we went with spray force and spray coverage. And so that's the way that we've defined to make sure that the shower head performs just as well as its standard shower head. So the WaterSense label can be found on more than 43,000 product models that have earned the label so far. And they're in 8 different categories that we have right now. We have most of the restroom water fixtures, including flushing urinals, flushometer valve, and tank type toilets. The flushometer valve toilets are found in commercial buildings mostly, and tank type toilets can be found in residential markets as well as some light commercial uses as well, like hotel rooms, hospital rooms, and dormitories, for example. We also label shower heads and lavatory faucets for the residential market. So commercial faucets that are found in a public restroom are not currently labeled because they actually save quite a bit of water already. The flow rate is already very low from the national standard. So there's no real room to include them in saving any more water. We also have outdoor products that are labeled. We have both weather-based and soil moisture-based irrigation controllers, which control a sprinkler system and irrigate a lawn. And then we also label spray sprinkler bodies, which is basically the housing of the sprinkler head itself, and it regulates the pressure within the system to make sure that it actually has effective spray without using a ton of water in the process. We also have labeled homes as well, which includes the single family and multifamily market. So those are available as well. So just to give you a sense of how water is being used in a commercial facility, we put together this graph that shows how water is broken down within a commercial facility in 5 different facility types. So as you can see, the blue line here at the bottom is the one that represents the restroom water use. And that's consistently about 30 to 40% of water use within a facility. The next one that comes up is the red bar, which is the cooling and heating systems, so the mechanical systems within a facility, and that can be about 10 to 20%, give or take, sometimes more, in different facility types. And then the third one is the green bar, which is irrigation, which can be from 5 to 30%, sometimes more, depending on how big the landscape is and where it's located. Then there's other things like pools and spas and kitchens that just depend on whether or not they're actually existing within that building type. But as you can see, those three restroom fixtures and mechanical systems and landscaping and irrigation use are pretty consistent across the board. So we'll be talking about each of those today a little bit. So today's focus is on quick wins. And so just so you know, how I define a quick win is something that is a low level of effort and has a very low or no capital expenditure involved. So that's changes to operation and maintenance practices and some minor retrofits and replacements. We are also going to be talking about moderate scale projects and large scale projects, which are larger retrofits and replacements, in a different webinar that's coming up in the next couple months. That one's on capital expenditures itself. So today we're just going to talk about the quick wins, and you can listen into another webinar later to learn more about the larger items. So one thing to keep in mind is that the cost of water is deceptively low. It's definitely lower than energy costs in many areas, but it's actually rising steadily in a lot of areas. One thing that you don't necessarily think about is that you actually pay for water twice. You pay for the water that's supplied to your building, and then you pay for the water that's discharged to the sewer. So anytime when you can save that water, you're getting significant savings. This also doesn't include the cost of energy that's needed to pump and heat that water. So to really get a full picture, you have to combine the water and sewer rates times the volume of water used plus fees and other associated costs to get the full picture. Other costs that are associated with higher volume usage are things like additional detergent and chemical costs and increased equipment maintenance that can have to happen with higher usage of a piece of equipment. And also, again, the energy costs. So when you're looking at a project, you have to kind of look a little bit more broadly to make sure that you're capturing all of the costs and figuring out how much you could actually save. One thing that's also important to keep in mind is that water use always needs to be verified. You need to check water use at each end use on a regular basis to find leaks and inefficiencies. In the energy world, if a circuit breaks, the piece of equipment stops working altogether. But in the plumbing world, if something stops working, it can continue flowing water and be doing it very inefficiently. This is because there are lots of physical components that break down over time, like valves and flappers and gaskets, things that are made out of rubber, things that are made out of, other equipment that could break down. And this is really important to really why you need to check at every end use, is because it could just, be broken but continue flowing and you would never know. And this is really important because leaking and continuously running water has no added value to your business. So it's important to pay attention to. A lot of you may have been coming from the energy world. You may have been working on energy efficiency for many years now. So we like to tell people one of the things you can do is just add water. And whenever you're talking about energy, you can also talk about water. You can make sure that water is included in your operation and maintenance procedures and any procurement policies that you have. So for example, if you are specifying the purchase of Energy Star equipment, you could also be specifying the purchase of WaterSense labeled fixtures. And then it's also important to make sure that all subcontractors and service contractors know that water efficiency is important to you, because they may be able to incorporate that into what they're already doing. They can also be helpful to conduct regular system audits to make sure that they're looking for leaks and repairing them. You can also track your water use in Portfolio Manager along with your energy use. And when you're looking at a project, it's important to look for rebates, just as you do in the energy world. It's important to look at all of the water utilities and energy and gas utilities to make sure that you can see if there's any potential savings out there for you. We've seen more recently that especially natural gas utilities are providing rebates for things like shower heads, because it does use so much heat, so much energy to heat the water. So that's why it's important to look at all utilities. Another thing you can start to do, and when you're starting to get a handle of this, is to review all of your bills for accuracy. You want to make sure that you're checking the rate class that your facility is in and the water meter size on your bill, because sometimes they're not correct and you may never know unless you look at it. It's also important to work with the utility to correct any problems. There are bill services, bill review services that are available in the market, and they can actually come through and audit all your bills from previous years, and they usually just get paid out of the savings that they find. So it can be a really important thing to check out. You may also want to consider some possible credits that may be available to you. In some places, they'll give you a reduced sewer charges if you can prove that water is not being discharged to the sewer. So you can prove that it's being evaporated out of your irrigation system or your cooling tower, for example. Those can be places where you can possibly get a sewer credit. There's also leak adjustments in some places where you can get a partial credit if you show that you found the leak and fixed it. You just report it to the utility. So that doesn't happen everywhere, but it's a possibility. So we wanted to talk about it today. As I just mentioned, leaks are really important to pay attention to, and this is because they can actually come up to about 6% of your water use within your facility, which is almost as high as heating water. So it's really important to take a look at them and see if you can fix them sooner than later. So how do you find leaks? You can find them with spikes in water usage that are found on your monthly bills or your meter reading that you're doing. If you can't find your bills, you can often contact the utility and they can give you copies of them. Because I know sometimes they go to another department like accounting, and that's something that you may, as a facility manager, you may never see them. So it can be important to try to get copies of them to be able to check out what's going on. You can also find problems and malfunctions during a water assessment or an equipment inventory. Or if you have them set up, you can receive alerts on leak detection and from failure abatement devices, which just notify you when there's a problem. When you're doing a walkthrough of a facility, it's also important to look for things like puddles, drips, running fixtures, discharge to floor drains that you don't expect, and just other things to look for if there's any problems. And sometimes you can get reports from employees and visitors or tenants themselves. The whole name of the game here is to prevent property damage and prevent a larger problem from happening in your building. So it's important we're going to talk a bit about leaks here just to make sure you realize how important it actually is. So leaks add up really fast. This chart is one that shows the size of a hole within a pipe and how much water is actually wasted through that hole. And so as you can see, with a tiny hole, you may be just talking about $480 a year. But if you get a larger hole, like the size of a pencil eraser, you could be talking about almost $30,000 a year in water costs. So it's important to pay attention to these leaks and find them as quickly as possible. Another thing to pay attention to is continuously running water. So that's where water is going through a system and being discharged to the sewer. So we wanted to put together kind of a graphic here to show you what, give you a concept of how much water and what that looks like. So as you can see on the left-hand side, water is coming out at a trickle out of a garden hose. That represents about 1 gallon per minute and $5,000 per year in water costs. On the right side, a garden hose at full flow is actually about 6 gallons per minute, and it can be up to $30,000 a year in costs. So anywhere that you're using this amount of water, there's the potential to find savings. So some other potential losses from water leaks, you can see these definitely vary on the size of the leak and what your pressure is in your system in terms of pounds per square inch. But as you can see, it goes all the way from a leaking toilet flapper or a broken fill valve to an unattended water hose at night, and that can be up to 10 gallons per minute. The worst one is a broken distribution line, and that could be a really significant water problem. And sometimes it could be underground, so it may be difficult to find. So we're going to talk about some things of how to find those in a little bit. So one thing that can be really powerful is to consider submetering some of your processes and pieces of equipment. This can help you find a problem before you get the bill, because you really don't want to wait till you get the bill to find out there's an issue. One thing that's important to keep in mind about submeters in the water world is that they don't need to be on a separate utility account. You can just use them for your own internal use. You can consider things like temporary flow meters or other water monitoring devices like acoustic leak detection, and those can be just clamped on to the outside of a pipe, and they can give you the amount of water that's flowing past it. So there are a lot of them on the market now that can be really helpful. Some of them you can also set up with alerts to quickly identify leaks and other inefficiencies so that you can fix them. So EPA kind of recommends submetering any system that uses about 1,000 gallons per day or 100,000 gallons per year. So those are things like tenant spaces, irrigation systems, cooling towers, single pass cooling systems, and rainwater systems. All of them can be important. There are also many leak detection devices that have come onto the market in the past couple years. This market has changed significantly, so there's a ton of new products that are out there. Leak detection devices in general can be a more expensive option than submeters, but they do have automatic shut-off capabilities, so they can shut off the water if they detect a leak. A lot of them are able to provide 24/7 monitoring and will actually provide wireless data through a cell phone or a tablet, so you can get data on how much water is being used. And then it also will alert you very quickly to identify any problems. And these can be system-wide or they can be specific to certain fixtures. So for example, there are certain sensors that you can put on a tank-type toilet to determine whether the toilet is running or not. And so that's specific to the fixture, whereas something else might be for an entire system in your building. So I just wanted to give you some examples of what leak detection devices look like. On the left, you'll see inflow sensors, and those are ones that are actually plumbed into the pipe run. You have to cut the pipe to put it in, but they actually will provide 24/7 monitoring, and they often have an auto shut-off valve that goes along with the alerts. Then there's also surface leak sensors, and those are just a little sensor that you can put on the floor, basically around a piece of equipment, or at home you can put it around your washing machine or your dishwasher, for example, and it will alert you if water is touching that sensor. So these can be helpful because they can go in multiple places and can give you that information in places that you may not be able to see easily. And they often will be attached to an automatic shut-off valve so that you can stop the leak immediately. There's also non-invasive leak detectors, and these are similar to submeters. They can include things like temporary flow meters and acoustic leak detection devices. And those basically you just snap on the outside of a pipe, and it will actually tell you how much water is flowing by it. These ones don't have auto shut off, but they can be moved around the facility, so they can be very helpful if you're looking at different parts of your facility. They don't always provide 24/7 monitoring because they can if you just put it there and leave it there. But the thought is that you use it temporarily and then move it to somewhere else within the system. An effective leak detection system combines all of these different devices. They include the flow sensors for the water monitoring and the leak detection, as well as the surface sensors that just go by the piece of equipment on the floor. And then they have shut-off valves with an app or an email or a text message to alert you if there's a problem. There are also water monitoring services that have come out. There are companies that package these features together and provide a service for leak detection and water monitoring at the same time. So they can help you manage your water use by looking at trends and use analytics. They have real-time monitoring alerts and usually have a dashboard so you can monitor whatever buildings that you want. It could be a single building or an entire portfolio. Some may also provide services related to water quality as well. So they're important to consider, but you have to figure out what's right for your facility. One thing that you can do that's low tech is to involve your employees. You want to really make sure that you've trained your custodial staff to identify and fix leaks, or at least to tell them where to report the leak so that it can be fixed by maintenance. You can post signage in restrooms and kitchen areas, for example, just to tell people why it's important to save water and give them the number to call if there's a problem. And they can also be used to remind people to shut off equipment between uses. So the one here on the slide we pulled off the internet, but basically it's just an example of showing that it's important to save water as well as how to report a leak or a problem. You can create your own, really, make it look however you want. Another thing you can do is to add specific tasks to existing routines. A lot of your employees already have routines that they do every day, more than likely, and you can kind of just add things into that to tell them how to look for water issues so that they can report it to maintenance. So the property or facility manager can check the meter during off hours when nobody's in the building. If there's any movement when no one's there, it can likely be a leak. They can also look for water that's running to floor drains near pieces of equipment because running water could be a leak in itself. With your housekeeping and cleaning staff, you can have them report dripping or clogged faucets and shower heads or toilets that are flushing by themselves. Sometimes this happens with sensors that are used on toilets. They just start flushing themselves. And unless somebody's there and noticing it, you may not know there's a problem. With tank type toilets, there can be a small ripple at the edge of the water in the bowl. If there's water that's rippling there, you most likely have a leak in your flapper, and your flapper needs to be replaced within your toilet. You can also engage your landscaping staff or your contractors that work on the landscape to look for any puddles or places where hardscape is being watered. Sidewalks don't grow, so there's no need to water them. And it's the same with the side of the building. If you are watering the side of the building, you're just wasting water. They also should look for broken sprinkler heads, dead plants, and other strange looking things. For example, if there's a depression in the landscape, that may indicate a water leak underneath it. With kitchen staff, it's important to remind them to shut off equipment between uses, especially things like food disposals, because they can use up to 15 gallons per minute. And to tell them to make sure that any steam equipment is actually tight, so that it's, the gaskets are tight, the hinges are tight, to make sure that there isn't any steam leaking from the equipment, because that's wasted water and energy. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about saving water in restrooms. As I mentioned, restrooms can account for up to 40% of water use in different types of facilities. If you have older fixtures that were installed before 1994, they use 3 to 5 times more water than newer, more efficient models. And in the restroom area, water savings really depends on user behavior, just like energy does. So it's important to make sure that you're paying attention and instructing people on how to use the equipment correctly. Regular maintenance is also vital, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit. One of the things that's important to do with restroom fixtures is to verify that they're working properly. This is an area where there are pieces of the equipment that do break down over time, so it's important to make sure that you know how much water each piece is using and making sure that it's the appropriate amount. So I put some things together here just to give you like a cheat sheet on how to actually verify the water use in restrooms. With tank type toilets, you can use dye tablets, which is the picture at the top, or you can use food coloring. And basically, you drop that into the tank and wait about 10 minutes. And if there's dye color in the bowl, then you have a leaky toilet flapper, which needs to be replaced. And they're only about $5 to $10, so it's a pretty easy one to replace. Next, if you have a flushometer valve toilet or a flushing urinal, you can do a timed flush test where you count the number of seconds that elapse during the flush cycle time. And basically, you can multiply that by these figures that are here, or you can use kind of an unofficial timer that if a toilet, for example, is flushing more than 4 seconds, then it's likely got a problem if it's a 1.6 gallon per flush toilet. So that can kind of tell you whether or not you need to look further into the piece of equipment or not. With faucets and shower heads, you do a timed flow test where you use a flow gauge bag, which is that picture here on the right where there's like levels that are up as it goes up. Or you can just use a measuring cup or a pitcher as long as you know how much volume is in it. And you basically just pour the water into that over that period of time and calculate how much water comes out. So that's an easy one to do. And there's more information about this in the South Florida Water Management District's report on how to do self-conducted audits. So some things to do generally in the restroom to make sure that you're maintaining it correctly is to test the water pressure that's serving each floor on a regular basis to make sure that it's in the optimal range between 20 and 80 pounds per square inch. And that's important just for all of your restroom fixtures to just make sure that they're getting the accurate amount of pressure so that they work correctly. You also want to inspect valves annually and replace any worn parts and adjust any automatic sensors on fixtures to avoid double or phantom flushes or faucets that are running longer than necessary. You also want to check for tampering. Unfortunately, dissatisfied users can disable sensors, remove aerators, and damage fixtures, so you want to make sure that it hasn't been tampered with. And then you want to regularly remove scale buildup and biofilm on any fixtures, especially faucets and shower heads, because it does build up over time and can make the product work less efficiently. Automatic sensors on their own don't save water, especially if they're not maintained properly. They can save some water, for example, on faucets where if it prevents someone from leaving the faucet running and just leaving the restroom. So they can save water that way, but on their own, they don't save water just by themselves. So you want to make sure that you're maintaining them and calibrating them regularly and to make sure that they're not malfunctioning. And again, they can be disabled by dissatisfied users. So you want to make sure that they are still intact and that the cleaning staff or the dissatisfied users haven't vandalized it, basically. And usually the manufacturer has instructions on how to calibrate the sensors, so you can just follow the manufacturer's instructions. So in general, with restrooms, you want to replace leaky toilet flappers because they can waste 30 gallons per day or 900 gallons per month. Most of them are less than $10, so they're a pretty easy switch if they're needed. You want to install WaterSense labeled faucet aerators or laminar flow devices, which are usually about $5 to $10, and they go on faucets, so they can be really cheap ways to start saving water. You want to replace inefficient shower heads so that you can get consistent spray force and spray coverage and still save water. So you want to look at WaterSense labeled fixtures as well there. And then long term, you want to replace older toilets and other fixtures that were installed before 1994 with WaterSense labeled models. And again, check all of your utilities for rebates because they are existing in many areas and can help bring the cost down of the project. So many people ask what a faucet aerator is or a laminar flow device. So I put together this slide just to show you what that looks like. So on the left-hand side is the standard aerator that's used in the residential market, and it provides kind of a whitish, steady stream of water that comes out of the fixture, out of the faucet, and just is kind of a soft feeling water flow. Then in the commercial marketplace, usually what's used is what's called a spray aerator, which has the spray pattern just like a shower head does, but that's used mostly in commercial restrooms and public spaces. And then on the right side is a laminar flow device, which basically just doesn't inject any air into the stream of water like an aerator does. This just provides a steady stream of water that's usually clear, and it's used in high flow applications or in healthcare facilities where aeration can cause problems. So each one of these you just screw onto the bottom of the faucet where the water comes out, and it can provide significant savings. So I put together a chart of the WaterSense labeled, basically the rate of water use within each one. So you can kind of get a sense of how much water is being used in each spot. So with toilets, it's usually less than 1.28 gallons per flush. With faucets, we have just the lavatory faucets that are used in private restrooms or in residential markets, and that's 1.5 gallons per minute. Again, we don't label commercial faucets just because they already are required to flow at 0.5 gallons per minute or 0.25 gallons per cycle. So they're already very low in water use, so there isn't any room to save more water and have it work appropriately. Shower heads are 2 gallons per minute or less, and flushing urinals are 0.5 gallons per flush or less. So when you're basically, the moral of the story is when you're looking to replace a product, you can look for the WaterSense label and find a product that's going to work well and save a lot of water. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about targeting mechanical systems. Mechanical systems can be up to 30% of your water use within a building. So it's important to often submeter these systems and to check them for leaks and inefficiencies, especially when hot water and steam are used, because you can save quite a bit of energy there as well. You want to minimize water use in single pass cooling systems, which I'll describe in a second, and maximize your cooling tower cycles of concentration, which I'll also talk about. Single pass cooling is basically where water flows through a piece of equipment once to cool the piece of equipment, and then it's discharged to the sewer. And because this is only being used once, you're using 40 times more water than a cooling tower to reduce the same heat load. So things that have single pass cooling are things like ice machines, refrigeration systems, air conditioners, air compressors, vacuum systems. There are many more of them, but those are the ones that are more commonly used in commercial buildings. They also are used in laboratory equipment quite a bit. So the name of the game here is really to maximize the efficiency of your existing system. To do that, you can use the minimum flow rate that's required by the manufacturer to cool that piece of equipment. They often will tell you what the minimum flow rate is so that you can actually use that instead of using more water than needed. You can install a control valve to turn off the cooling water when there's no heat load and put it in standby mode. Then if you have it in standby mode, or you have a control valve that's on there, you want to make sure that it's working properly on a regular basis. If you can also recirculate water by connecting it to a cooling line that already exists. So there may already be a pipe that's going to the cooling tower, for example, that can bring the water that's heated to that to be have the heat removed again. In the long run, you want to eliminate these systems and replace them with air-cooled equipment, or put them into a system where they have a recirculating system, as you can retrofit them with closed-loop recirculating systems. And that will basically just use the water more than once to cool the system before it's discharged to the sewer. So these can be some of the most wasteful pieces of equipment within your facility in terms of water use. So they are pretty important to pay attention to. Next, you want to look at your cooling towers. Cooling towers can be 20 to 50% of total water use within a facility. So they're a really good target for water efficiency. They use a lot of energy as well to pump the water continuously. So they are, important ways to save water and energy at the same time. The function of the cooling tower is to evaporate water. So that's not really the target for water efficiency. We need that to continue to happen to make sure that the pieces of equipment will still get cool and that the water is cooled down again so it can be reused. In this case, you want to monitor the water chemistry and flow. So not just the flow rate of this, but also looking at the water chemistry to make sure that everything is accurate and correct and what you expect it to be to make sure that the system is working accurately. And then you want to maximize your cycles of concentration. So what are cycles of concentration? Cycles of concentration is an indicator of the number of times that water can be recirculated in the system before it's discharged to the sewer. So it's basically just it's a ratio. So it's limited usually by the concentration of minerals that are dissolved in the water. And this is often measured by a conductivity meter. And because if you reuse the water too many times and you have the dissolved minerals in it, those minerals can build up within the system and damage the equipment if they're not kept in check. So that's basically it's reusing the water as many times as you can before it starts to have mineral buildup and scaling within the system. So, for example, if you can increase the number of times that it goes through the system from 3 cycles to 6 cycles, you're reducing your water use by 20%, and you're reducing the blowdown water by 50%. Makeup water is basically when, excuse me, I'll start with blowdown water. So blowdown water is basically water that's discharged from the system to make sure that the minerals aren't building up. So after the water is discharged from the system, you have to add more water to the system to make sure there's enough water in it. So that's called makeup water. So if you increase your cycles of concentration from 3 to 6 cycles, you reduce the makeup water by 20% and the blowdown water by 50% because you're reusing that water as many times as you can. So many of you likely have service contractors that actually service this piece of equipment. So those are ones that you want to have a conversation with them and let them know that water efficiency is one of your goals, and they can help you get the system in a good place where you're saving you in the right kind of cycles for your system. Because every place is going to be different depending on the mineral content of the water. So unfortunately, it's very individualized by the location that you're in. And you need to kind of take that into account when you're determining how many times the water can be recirculated. This is a good place to install submeters because so much water is being used on both the makeup and the blowdown lines to monitor the flow within the system. And this can let you know how much water is being added and how much water is being discharged. This also helps you calculate the cycles of concentration, which can help you determine whether you're on target or if you need to make further changes to the system. One of the things you can do is to make sure that the fill valves on the cooling tower are cutting off cleanly and not just running all the time. And then also to choose a water treatment vendor that specializes in water efficiency. Many of them will leave you a water chemistry report, and oftentimes they just get filed away. People don't necessarily read them, but it's important to read those reports to verify that you're making progress towards your goals. And it will tell you what the number of cycles is that you're running on currently, and that can help you determine if you're close to your goal or not. It's also a good idea to use the makeup water submeter because it can help prove that water is being evaporated in the system, and that can often be used to get a sewer credit from your utility if they have it. So that's another reason to pay attention to this as well. So next I'm going to get into outdoor water use, and this is a lot less complicated than mechanical systems, so hopefully you guys will kind of gravitate towards this a bit. Water use outdoors can be 20 to 30% of a building's water use, and this really depends on the size of the landscape, the type of irrigation system that you have, and the plants that are there. Really, the name of the game here is to minimize the amount of water that's needed to supplement rainwater to meet the plant's watering needs. So rainwater is obviously already happening everywhere, but sometimes plants need more than that to survive. So that's why a lot of systems will put in irrigation systems to make sure those plants are getting the water they need to survive. And we're not saying you shouldn't put in an irrigation system. We just want it to be as efficient as possible if you have one. There are many places that have service agreements for landscape and irrigation services. This is another area where you can have a conversation about your water efficiency goals and to make sure that they're following any requirements for local water restrictions. Unfortunately, many areas of the country are in drought, and so there are often restrictions on outdoor water use. And the number of times that you can irrigate a week or the day that you can irrigate on really just depends on the local area. So it's important that they're following the local requirements. And if you are actually using your existing staff, there are courses that they can take or seminars that they can take to learn about water efficient techniques to help make your system better as well. So some things that you can do for operation and maintenance of your landscape is the really important thing is to protect your investment in plants. You've paid for these plants. Some of them are often quite expensive. So it's important to make sure that you don't damage the plants by overwatering or underwatering. Overwatering can actually cause damage to building foundations. So you want to make sure that you're watering the appropriate amount. You can also remove weeds so that the water that you're putting onto the landscape is actually available for the plants that you want. You can raise the blade on your lawnmower to allow turf grass to grow longer. This actually allows them to build their roots more deeply, and that actually makes for a stronger plant. So it's important to make sure that you can allow them to grow that longer amount, and that can actually make them hardier and able to withstand any problems. It's also important to make shade because and apply less water to shaded areas because it creates a little microcosm, and basically you can then irrigate that area less because there's less water evaporating from the landscape. You want to also minimize the water use for other purposes. So you want to shut off water features whenever possible. I know they're beautiful and aesthetically great, but they use a lot of water. So it's important to pay attention to them. You want to recirculate water if you have a water feature. You want to recirculate it as much as you can so that you're getting the best bang for your buck. And then you want to sweep, not water, hard surfaces. So don't use water to wash down the sidewalk or the driveway or the parking lot. To use brooms instead. Or if you have to use water, use a water broom because they are more efficient than a hose. Next is to talk a little bit about irrigation. Irrigation actually, as much as 50% of the water that's used outdoors for irrigation can be wasted because of inefficient watering methods and systems. So these basically these water losses come from wind, evaporation, and overwatering, and they're caused by poor system design, poor installation and maintenance, and lack of maintenance in some cases, and improper scheduling. So we have some information about this on our website, but here are some things to look for. So the pictures that I put here are kind of extreme examples of what could happen, but sometimes it's it's a little more subtle. So on the right side is what we call a geyser, and that's where water is shooting out of the system because the sprinkler head broke off, and that's obviously the worst case scenario. And then there are other things like the picture in the middle are just a broken connection within the system and is causing a significant leak. Sometimes those leaks can be happening underground, so you may have to look for things like depressions in the landscape, and that could be an indicator of a leak underground. You can also check the system for broken or clogged sprinkler heads. You can make sure the sprinkler heads don't tilt too high or too low and adjust them so that they're not watering the pavement. Like I said, pavement and sidewalks don't grow, so you don't need to water them. You want to look for pooling or puddling of water within the landscape, and look for those depressions to see if there's an issue. This is an area where it can be really helpful to submeter the system. So if there is a change in the water use, you can be alerted very quickly that there's a problem somewhere. It's also important to audit your system on about every 3 years, and you can use an irrigation professional that's been certified by a WaterSense labeled program to do that. Basically, what that means is that we've worked with a few organizations to create a test for water efficiency knowledge, and once the irrigation professional passes that test, they then have that knowledge and can go out and use it in the marketplace. So we have a list of people that have passed the test already that are available for hire. So you can check that out on our website. I put the link here. You'll be getting a copy of these slides after the call today or tomorrow, so you can access these links. So some things to do with your irrigation system, really you want to update the schedule of your system regularly. You can't just set it and forget it. Unfortunately, you have to pay attention. The time zone change is a good one to kind of remind people that when you change the time zone, you may have to change your irrigation system's schedule. You want to schedule each individual zone separately so that they're getting the amount of water that's appropriate for what's in that zone. So you may have different zones for trees or a certain section of your landscape, and that may need a different amount of water than the rest of your landscape. So it's important to schedule each zone separately so that it gets the proper amount of water. Again, installing or monitoring submeters to indicate if there's leaks or problems is another important one. If you have a traditional manual system or a clock tower with an irrigation controller, you really want to replace those. They're very inefficient. And the WaterSense labeled controllers are available with both weather-based and soil moisture-based systems. The weather-based system takes water from a local weather station to determine if watering is needed. A soil moisture sensor basically just goes into the ground and sits in the dirt and basically will tell you what the moisture content is of that dirt. So you can determine if watering is needed in that as well. You also want to install rain shutoff devices or sensors to make sure that you're not watering while it's raining. Unfortunately, that can happen if you're not paying attention. And with the sprinklers, you want to check the pressure in the system so that it's not high or low, and because that inconsistency can cause problems with how the water is being distributed into the system. You can also install WaterSense labeled spray sprinkler bodies to help maintain constant pressure and flow within the system. We are working right now to possibly label irrigation nozzles, so that sprinkler nozzles will be likely one of our new product categories coming up. So those will be hopefully available in the next couple of years as well. So I'm just going to mention quickly commercial kitchens. If you have one, they can be a significant amount of water use. You want to turn down or turn off equipment at slow times or when you're not using it because they can use such a quite high amount of water. You want to consider installing automatic shutoff valves so that it happens automatically. When you have those valves, you want to check them and make sure that they're working properly and that any self-closing nozzles are actually closing when they're supposed to. You want to reduce the waste from any steam equipment because it's such a high use of energy and water. You want to keep the doors and lids closed and secured at all times and replace the gaskets and tighten the hinges to make sure there's a good seal to retain that heat and steam. If you have a food disposal system, as I mentioned, they can be up to 15 gallons per minute. So you want to make sure that you're running cold water through the system at, first off, to make sure that you're minimizing energy use. But you want to turn off that water when it's not in use. If possible, you should encourage users to scrape the food waste into a compost bin instead of flushing it down the sewer system. Next, I'm just going to go over some quick resources that are available from WaterSense to help you do all these things that I just talked about. WaterSense has a bunch of information on our website. We have information by facility type, as well as best practices, water saving tips and assessment tools, worksheets and checklists, and recorded training webinars like this one today. We also have case studies as well. So it's an important, resource for you guys to tap into. We have a couple of checklists that we have. The one that I'll point out to you right now is our operation and maintenance checklist. This is a newer product that we have. And basically it's just for you to print out or put on your tablet and to walk through the system and your facility and see what things you might want to look for. We also have sample worksheets to help you do a water assessment and to keep track of things over time. This is what the O&M checklist looks like, the operation and maintenance checklist, and it just goes through different pieces of equipment and tells you what to look for to maintain that equipment as efficiently as possible. Next, we have our best practices guidebook. This goes through every water using piece of equipment within a commercial facility. It's kind of weighty, it's about 350 pages, but there's a lot of good resources that are in there for each specific product type or equipment type. We are in the process of updating those, so we're hoping to have the new versions posted in the next month or two. And then for the people that are in the multifamily world, we have multifamily guides and assessment worksheets specifically for that market as well. So I put the link here to the multifamily guides. So I give you a whole bunch of information. What can you do right now? So some of the things you can do is start collecting your water bills and identify existing meter locations. Identify areas and systems for submeters and educate your employees on what to look for and how to report leaks and how to fix them immediately if that's their job. And then you can also use all of this information to create a list of potential projects and contact utilities to see if they have rebates or other incentives available to you. So this is the first in this year's Water Wednesdays series. So I encourage you guys to pay attention to the monthly Energy Star training email that will tell you when the next ones are scheduled. They'll probably be, the next one will be on conducting a water assessment from start to finish. Then we'll be doing one on evaluating water use and capital improvement projects, which is kind of the opposite of what we talked about today. And then we'll be doing one on outdoor spaces as well. We plan to do several of them this year, 8 of them. So we'll be scheduling those in the next couple of months. If you can't wait, we have recordings of last year's webinars. Some of them are similar to the ones that we're doing this year, but we have some new ones this year as well. So I put the links here if you want to read or you want to actually check out the recording of previous webinars to see what is there. So now I'm going to open things up for questions. And so if you have them, please enter them into the chat and we will answer them as much as we can. So one of them is just a comment. You can get deduct meters, sewer deduct meters on equipment that evaporate water. This can often reduce your sewer costs. And yes, that's true. That's helpful for things like irrigation systems and cooling towers. Do you have a resource for water end use breakdown per buildings and type and occupancy? There is some information that's available and I can send that to you after the call. Some of it's in our best practices guidebook. There's also a study that was done on commercial buildings end use, and that's kind of separate from that. That's more detailed. But I would encourage you to check out the best practices guidebook because we do have introductions to each section where we talk about how much water is being used by different product types. And the same similar question, water use percentage breakdown for typical building types. And that's the slide that I went over towards the beginning. I will say that each building is different. So it's important to do a water assessment or a water audit in your building to find out how water is being used in your building. Because everyone has different types of equipment and different fixtures. So it's important to do the assessment on the building to find out how much water is being used. Do you certify waterless urinals? No, we actually don't certify waterless urinals. They are completely different technology from flushing urinals, so they're outside the scope of our specification. I will say with waterless urinals, they have very different maintenance requirements than flushing urinals. So if you're considering adding waterless urinals to your facility, I would encourage you to talk to a plumbing engineer to make sure that your system is set up to do waterless urinals. You often need some water use upstream from the waterless urinal itself to make sure the waste is properly flushed from the system. So you need to have a faucet above it or a toilet above it or a shower head, for example, above it in the system to make sure that it's flushing the waste throughout the piping, the plumbing system. And to make sure that you understand the maintenance requirements and the cost of replacement cartridges, for example, or sealants that are used within the system. What are your thoughts on occupancy sensors on toilet valves? I think occupancy sensors on toilet valves can be helpful if they're calibrated right. They can save some water sometimes, but on toilets, for the most part, it's a health and safety issue. So it can reduce the touch points within a system for a person using the restroom. So there can be improvements to health and well-being in that case. But you need to make sure they're calibrated correctly so that they're not double flushing or phantom flushing, which is when they're flushing when no one's there. I'm sure we've all seen that at a certain point, at some point in our lives. Does Energy Star have a list of top commercial and residential restroom fixtures available to the public? Well, WaterSense has a list of labeled products on our website, and that you can find just by going to epa.gov/WaterSense. And on the right-hand side, there's a little button that says Find Products. And so you can actually search a list of all the products that have been certified and use that to verify whether a product you're considering is actually labeled or not. We have another question. Do hands-free faucets in restrooms save water? So similar to the sensors on toilets, you have to make sure that the actual sensor is calibrated correctly to make sure that it's not wasting water. It can save some water because it prevents the people from walking away from the faucet while it's still running. But it does need to be calibrated regularly to make sure that it's using the right amount of water and shutting off when it's supposed to shut off. The next question is, are there government incentives available for adopting sub-metering technology? I don't know of any currently, but they may exist in certain areas. So that may be something that you want to talk to your utility about to make sure that you know what's available. Sometimes if you're doing projects and you're a large commercial or institutional building, sometimes they'll do custom rebates or custom incentives if your project's big enough. But I haven't heard of any specifically for sub-metering technology just yet. And just so you know, WaterSense doesn't label sub-meters or flow meters yet. It is something that we're considering, but there are so many new ones that are out there on the marketplace right now. We don't even have a list of them all. So I would encourage you to check the different features and the price point to see what you actually need for your system and what makes sense for your budget. So that same goes for leak detection equipment. It's all kind of the Wild West right now. There's so many different new things that are coming on the market and lots of different features that you can find on these submeters and leak detection devices. It's really great that there's so many options, but it can be a little overwhelming. So I would just take a look and see what different features are available and how much you actually want to pay for it. Let's see. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any, but I will say that I'm available. The WaterSense helpline's available. If you guys think of questions afterwards, you can contact us and we will, get you an answer as soon as we can. So now I think since we have no more questions, nope, still no more questions. I'm going to wrap things up for today and give you 1 minute back. So thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to learn more about water efficiency and things you can do to save water in your building. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your afternoon.